We are so excited to have you joining us for our final session in the Niswonger Remote Learning Series. All of our sessions were created to provide you as educators some opportunities to extend and refine some of your practices, especially those dealing with students in remote and online learning. We're going to showcase some high impact practices this afternoon, model some strategies, share some resources, and highlight some ways to facilitate effective remote learning, just keeping in mind that all of these things will translate well to your brick and mortar classroom. You will see that today I am Brandy Wilson presenting with Christy Snyder. We are both instructional coaches with Niswonger Foundation.
I'm sure most of you are very familiar with Zoom by this time, but in case you're not, we'll take just a minute to highlight a couple of tools. First of all, along the bottom, you're going to see your video and microphone options. We would love to see your faces. I think some of you maybe are here by phone and can't do that, and that's okay. But if you can, we'd love to see your faces. Also, your microphone, of course, can be muted or not. Just to keep the background noise at a minimum, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless, of course, you would like to make a comment or ask a question. Speaking of questions and comments, another tool that we want to show you is the chat feature, that little chat bubble. If you click it, it should open up a chat pane to the side, and feel free at any time to chat questions or make comments using this feature. All right, so this deeper dive session is kind of a culminating activity of a learning arc. And Christy, we're just tickled to death that you stuck with us this whole time. Thank you. We really are so excited to see you today. We're glad each of you are here, but especially Christy. She's been with us every single session. This session, this deeper dive, is also based off of the AMLE article, This We Believe. It posits that education for young adolescents should have 4 central attributes. It should be developmentally responsive, challenging, empowering, and equitable. Our session today will still be rooted in those posits and will focus on fostering community and relationships within the virtual classroom.
All right, in this session today, we're going to be exploring those 4 central attributes of building community and relationships that we have talked about in our previous sessions, but just know that you did not have to be a part of those to understand those 4 posits, because we will be going over those today. Also, we're going to analyze a couple scenarios and apply the understanding of our 4 posits to those classroom lesson segments to help ensure that instruction is developmentally responsive, challenging, empowering, and equitable. This is our agenda for this session. Please note that this is not actually the time based on here with us at 3:50, but the time that we will spend our 60 minutes together. Also, there is a link that Christy is going to drop into the chat now, and this link will force you to make a copy, and this is our participants guide for the session. Please feel free to use the participants guide. You may take notes, or feel free to take notes on your own notebook paper and at your leisure. This is a tool we've made available to help you feel organized and make it easier to follow along with the session. So feel free to open it in a session or a separate window, and you can minimize both windows to ensure that you're able to see our meeting and your participants guide at the same time.
Okay, please forgive me. I'm having trouble getting that link in the chat.
I will be happy to drop it now.
Okay, thanks, Brandy. Did that go up? I can't see my chat.
All right, we'll give you just a second to open the link in case you would like to use that participants guide. And then Christy will get us started.
All right, so just a little bit of preparation for the reading that you're about to do. We're going to ask you to reflect on the This We Believe article in just a minute, and these will be the 3 questions that we'll be using for reflection. What connection can you make between a new idea from the article and your prior knowledge? What new ideas did you get that extended or pushed your thinking in new directions? And then what is challenging or confusing for you? So those will be the lens through which we'll view this article. So next we are actually going to explore this article from AMLE, the Association of Middle Level Education. Again, if you're not familiar with them, please check out their website. There is just a wealth of knowledge there for middle school teachers. You'll be able to access this article either using this bit.ly link. Actually, sorry, I think you have to use the bit.ly link because you can't click on my presentation. I always forget that. And Brandy will also drop that link in the chat so that you'll be able to access it pretty quickly. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to read this article. And if we see that everybody's finished, we don't have to take that long. But if you would just use that link to read this article now, we'll get back together in about 5 minutes.
All right, folks, you have about 1 minute. We are in no rush. That was 5 minutes. Do you need more time to finish the article? All right, Miss Christie.
All right. So again, here are those questions that, oh, we still have people coming in. Here are these questions that we would like for you to consider. We're going to give you about 2 minutes just to kind of, and you know, maybe you don't answer all three, that's okay. We don't have to be that formal, but if you would just, we'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of think about these questions and come up with a response. I'm going to try to stop this thing before it makes that awful noise that it makes. All right. So would anybody be brave enough to share with us? And you can either share in the chat or you can unmute and just tell us what you think.
Well, I wrote, you know, it's kind of challenging right now to do some of the physical and social connections because, you know, with the computers in the room and everything, you can't really get up. You can't get the kids around each other. And it's been kind of hard, I guess, creativity wise, because a lot of times I would do a lot of like drawing or a lot of kind of art incorporated things in my science room. And it's just hard to do.
That is definitely difficult, and it's one of our goals was to be able to translate some brick and mortar classroom strategies and best practices into a virtual environment? And how can you feel like you're part of a group within the walls of your classroom when you really can't be part of a group?
Yeah.
And I know that throughout our entire sessions, our biggest goal was to, build upon and leverage that community building and relationships within the classroom with this, not only with among the students, but with the teachers as well. So I think just trying to be as creative as possible, using some of the normal ideas that we would have, Christy, and adapting those to the environment that we're in. Sometimes it takes a team of people to kind of work together to give a different perspective or think outside the box of our norm. And I hope you have that there, but we would love to hear some of your ideas and try to, just like we said, translate those into a more suitable or to suit the environment you're in right now. Anyone else would like to speak to that?
Of course, I'm not in the classroom. Oh, sorry, there's echo right now, but something that I think resonated with me about it being about instruction being appropriately challenging would be that in a virtual setting, I think it could be really easy to think about how to translate that to that virtual setting in such a way. It's not easy to translate that into a virtual setting in a way that maybe can always keep the same rigor we would have in our traditional classrooms, and how we figure out a way to do that. Like, I think it would be easy to, in the translating it, actually not make it as challenging. Like in our effort to rearrange how we might, teach it, or what we might ask kids to do, we might inadvertently make it less challenging. We might lose the rigor.
And I think part of the reason we're doing that is because as teachers, we have soft hearts and we want to help these kids, and distance learning is a struggle. It is not easy. And so I do see a lot of teachers just trying to lower that bar and make it, easier on kids. And so I do think that challenging piece is even more difficult to achieve now than last year.
I wonder what makes us do that, which you spoke to some of that, Christy, and saying that we just love those kids and we don't want them to struggle. And maybe as educators, we know that all of this is new when it comes to the virtual environment. And so in a sense, like Bethany said, we take out the rigor, sometimes inadvertently, unintentionally. And why do we do that? Why is that an automatic reaction for us? And maybe it's because it is something new, and we want, maybe in our minds, we think we're scaffolding in a sense. I'm trying to show us a little grace here too.
But have you seen that advertisement on TV though, or it's a announcement or something? And we keep, from coaches and teachers' perspectives, keep thinking about how hard it is on us and how hard it is on parents. But, we've all seen examples of kids crying and frustrated, and, it's across the board. So I've tried to remind my teachers, when I see frustration in teachers and principals, imagine what some of the students are feeling like. Some feel like they've been given Christmas, but others are, they're frustrated, and it's not the way they want to learn.
Well, I love what Candace says, and it resonates so deeply with me, Candace, because of my daughters. But Candace says, thinking about the YouTube influencers and what is so appealing about those people running their channels. And my husband and I have laughed and, in a sense, almost become worried about, why is it cooler to watch someone play with your toys rather than you actually playing with them? Why is it cooler now? Like, we actually played with the toys. We didn't have to have someone tell us about them. And so that resonates deeply with me, Candace, and I think we can see that in this online learning. And I think goes back to, Christy, what you were saying when you were talking about the labs, that it is easier, or not that it was easier, that it's difficult. They can watch a lab, but it's not the same as actually doing it.
No.
Very different.
But you know what Candace was saying too, I was having this conversation with my teaching partner, is, every year we have kids who do all this stuff on the internet that they get in trouble for. But then when it comes to submitting stuff for class, they don't know how to do it. I'm like, how do you know all this technology to do all this other stuff, but you can't do the class technology that we've showed you 18 times? So I think that kind of goes back to that, why do you follow the YouTubers? Like, what's appealing about it?
We've got to leverage that. We're going to become influencers, YouTube influencers. That's where the money's at.
And really, they are very good at empowering kids, these YouTube influencers. It's amazing. And I teach in Jefferson County, and our teachers are really struggling to build relationships with their distance learners. And it's really hard to be empowering when you don't have relationships with kids, and yeah.
And Christy, isn't your county, you're not doing video, correct?
Correct.
And I think that makes it even more difficult to, feel empowered and build those relationships. So hopefully throughout this session, we'll have some tools or strategies, maybe some protocols that you can take with you, Christy, and use those. But as always, you can reach out to us.
All right. Thank you for those reflections. Let's see here. All right. So this just kind of summarizes that article. The developmentally responsive piece is just so important, especially for middle school age kids. They want to be social. That's just their nature. And we need to make our instructional choices align with where they are developmentally. And research shows us that this can close their achievement gaps. So we just need to understand where students are, where we want them to be, and then how we're going to get them there. Things like Padlet, I have seen be really successful with bridging the distance learning and the in-person learning gap and try to build community and relationships. I have 3 distance learners at home, and when my daughter gets to put one of those sticky notes up there and read what everybody else in her class at school is saying, and, other distance learners, it does something to her spirit. It lifts her spirits, it makes her feel connected, and it's just really a very small thing that is really meaningful to her because she's missing her friends and that interaction a lot. We've already kind of talked about the empowering piece, but in providing students with the knowledge and skills that they need to kind of create agency and help them to take control of their choices they're making in their life, take more responsibility for their learning. I think that is incredibly difficult now in this virtual setting that we're in, but we can still find ways to give students choice and voice, choice boards, students, podcasting is a really neat way. I've seen a couple of people do that with kids, and that's something that they really enjoy. Students, getting to choose what topics they're learning about. That one's a little more difficult. I know in Jefferson County, we have adopted the Learn Zillion guidebooks, and kids don't get much choice. They do get some, they might get to, they're choosing some independent reading novels and that kind of thing. But with these new curricula, it's kind of difficult, I guess, to give kids maybe a lot of choices, especially when you're preparing these lessons and putting them in Canvas or whatever LMS you're using. I think it is difficult to build in choice. But things like choice boards make that much easier. The challenging piece, we know that middle school kids are developing, rapidly, intellectually as well as physically, and they are more and more prepared to grasp complex ideas. And, we have to meet students where they are, not only developmentally, but we also need to challenge them to develop further. And we can do that by having high expectations for them and creating these learning opportunities. Some examples of creating more challenging curriculum would be, of course, active learning. Anything you could do to have them doing the lift rather than the teacher doing the lift. Also, tech tools like Nearpod or using polls. Anything you can do to spur these peer conversations, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous, is also very helpful. As far as the equitable piece, AMLE believes that an essential attribute of successful schools is that education received there must be equitable. And basically, to be equitable, you're advocating for every student's right to learn. You're providing relevant and challenging learning opportunities. You're celebrating their differences and just creating as many equitable opportunities for them as you can. Reflective practice, kind of like what we just did, is one way to accomplish that. Also, Padlet, using agendas is another way. So we just wanted to give you some concrete examples of how each of those 4 posits could manifest themselves in the classroom.
For our 4th posit there, Christy, I just wanted to share something that Sarah Kitzmiller had commented in the chat box when she said, just because they can't read doesn't mean they can't think, you know? And I think with equity, we sometimes see that through a narrow lens of thinking about race or gender when it has so much more to do with other than just those 2 things. And it is, I loved how Christy worded that when you said giving everyone access to their learning and rigorous learning and not trying to make them feel incapable of completing the work. I just think that's huge when we consider equity and giving everyone the same chance and opportunity. All right, now that we have dove in a little deeper to the 4 posits and attributes of what AMLE believes is, I guess, substantial in creating a successful education for our students, and we're going to look at a few videos. And in these videos, you're just going to see a portion of a lesson, so just a lesson segment. And as you watch each video, we're going to ask that you analyze the segments through the lens of the posits that we just discussed. And you'll see there, we know that's a lot of information to hold in your brain at once. So those 4 posits are listed there on the screen. And also, if you would like to use the participants guide, there is a place for you to take notes on each of the posits. But we don't want you to feel overwhelmed. You do not have to look for each of the posits. Something may jump out at you, or you may want to focus in on 2, or maybe 1 that you're personally struggling with and would like to see how it's done in other classrooms. So again, do take notes, whether it be on the participant's guide or personally on a sheet of paper, because we will be referring back to these videos and that will be helpful. So in watching, what posits do you see exemplified in the video? Just note those down. What do you recognize? What are the actions of the teacher, maybe even the students, that you see as evidence of these attributes of a successful education? Our first video, Christy will start. About that. All right, so in this video, we're going to give you just maybe 20 seconds to kind of gather your thoughts and finish your note taking, and think about where you saw evidence of these posits. All right, we'd love for you to share out either in the chat box or feel free to mute yourself and turn on the mic. So what posit Do you think, my first question for you was exemplified in this video? Which posit do you feel like stood out to you the most? You've got challenging, the pace was brisk, students had no way to fake it. I love that. So timing. I'm not going to react, compare your responses to their peers, developmentally responsive, and challenging. And I love this, the text was the expert in this classroom, not necessarily the teacher. Teacher was more of a facilitator. Developmentally responsive, they're social in the turn and talk, which I know is great in the brick and mortar classroom, but what about our circumstances now? And hopefully we'll be able to adapt some best practices later on. Love your thoughts. Christy and I both loved, for the developmentally responsive piece, that students had the choice to share out. They were able to raise their hands. They were able to check their answers against others, which was also empowering before sharing out, but also developmentally responsive, as we know kids don't want to be embarrassed within the classroom, especially if they think their answer is incorrect. So that sense of confidence they get from knowing that someone else's answer is similar to theirs.
And Brandy, I loved that it was so obvious that the teacher had established norms, like for, you know, look at your speaker, and the way when they turned and talked, they knew exactly who to turn and talk to. It wasn't like up for discussion. He had the structure that was there. And I think, you know, kids, they may say they hate structure, but they really do much better when structure is in place. I think that's part of being developmentally responsive as well.
I believe that's empowering and also offers equity because the students know what to expect. And so even though the rigor and challenge is there, they know how to go through the process, and that's not a fear of theirs, or it's not scattered or unorganized. They know exactly what's expected.
I'll add on to that, Brandy. I noted, similar to Christy, just the culture of empowerment, that, you know, to what Sarah said, I'm not going to react, but he said, we're going to build a consensus as a class. We're going to build our knowledge together as a class and come to some consensus about what we think about his guiding question. And then also his use of cold call. I mean, that's challenging as a student. And I think Catherine noted, you can't fake it. You got to be ready. But yet it felt like there was a culture that he would be there to support. Example, the student who wasn't sure how to say Kaiser, he was there to step in and support and move on. So yeah, lots of ways that kids knew they were going to have to be involved, between the quick write, the cold call, the turn and talk. I mean, there was no way of getting out of doing the challenging work of that lesson.
So agree. Well, how about we try this again in a second scenario? Again, watching the video, looking for those 4 posits. Feel free to take notes and think about what stood out to you the most and which posit you felt was the most evident.
Excuse me.
All right, so that is virtual learning. Again, students aren't in this video. It is the teacher. So just a few seconds to gather your thoughts before we share out. All right, does any brave soul, oh, we've got one in the chat. He gives the objective in teacher talk and then in layman's terms. I feel like that is definitely developmentally responsive, Tracy, in the sense that, and also empowering because the students know what they're getting ready to do, but definitely developmentally responsive for students to have it on their level. Challenging because he still expects the students to fill in the answers right then.
Yeah, it's really active, isn't it? That's what I love about it. Even though it's virtual, he's requiring them to do things. You know, he's not just rushing through. He's actually pausing the video and giving them time to do it. And I think more teachers now, as we're doing this virtual learning, they need to kind of think about what can I do to make learning still active.
And if we want to push the developmentally responsive, I mean, folks, his hat's on backwards. Like, how much cooler can you get as a teacher? Maybe our next professional learning, I'll wear a backwards hat. Oh, wrong crowd.
I like that he made a connection to what they it sounded like to me, I'm inferring, to what they normally do in class. He's like, just like we do in class, I'm going to have you do the do now, and you're going to do that part, and then we're going to, do whatever comes next. So I like that he was trying to make a connection for them to maybe something they were familiar with.
And I think the fact that this is like an asynchronous class, speaks to the equitable piece. Because, sometimes you've got 4 kids at home and they've got one computer they're using. So not everybody can log in at the same time. So just, I think there's definitely a need for synchronous teaching, but also a very great need for asynchronous as well, and just what equity it brings.
Ooh, and the fact that if it is asynchronous, and I feel like I'm a student who wishes if we were live that I could, if the teacher would slow down, or I wish I could watch that again. I mean, I've got a chance to do that and feel like I can be successful. So it's kind of neat about, that opportunity to do that.
If your internet isn't working right then, you can watch it later when it's fixed. Yeah.
Well, and when he tells them to pause, he gives that student agency there too. And it's, I think, goes back to, I think maybe something that you had said, Bethany, about students are able to feel like he's referring to things that they had done in the classroom before. And with that pause, that's what would happen in the classroom. Like, here's your time to work. So pause the video, let's work, and then move on. And so making it feel as normal as possible, even though it is online. And we don't know this as it's just a segment, but I also wonder, does he do a flipped classroom to empower the students, and he's just a facilitator? How does he go about things? But with being math, I'm thinking, I would love to look into that and see how he does it, if so. But I think that could almost empower the students even more to know that they are able to work out things on their own, choose which way they go, but still have that structure that he offers. Any other thoughts before we move to our next scenario?
Randy, I felt like the fact that, and this is not just from this video, but also virtual learning in general, I feel like it does lend itself to the equitable portion that you guys mentioned, because in a classroom, you would have 4 or 5 kids that wanted to answer all the time, be the star student, and the others get to take a back seat and they don't have to participate as much. Whereas virtual learners have to respond in the same way. So that high-level student who wants to answer all the questions has to respond in the same way that the one who would hide in the back of the classroom has to respond.
And I think, Tracy, also to piggyback on that, those quiet students that normally wouldn't respond also may feel safer in this environment to respond, because they may have the option to chat. They may not have to use their voice. And I think that's huge too, and hits that equity piece. All right, let's get into our final scenario, scenario 3. We want, again, for you to look at all 4 posits, but which one speaks to you and resonates with you in this video. All right, thank you for sticking with us through that 3rd video. So what stood out to you? We see power in words, immediate feedback, informative feedback while they're working. I think that's empowering and also developmentally responsive, and also challenges the students to correct their answers. Positive, all the teachers were positive, specific feedback, empowering, equitable, clear about application of instruction. When I watched this video, one thing that I thought about immediately was not how much teachers are working in the sense of like they're overworking, they're working harder, not smarter, but opposite, they're working smarter, not harder, but that's teacher tired. Can you imagine at the end of the day continually doing that? But that's what we're called to do. I loved this feedback. I think for students, do you know you have the students like, have you graded the test yet? Are you there yet? And you're paying it like, I've not had time. I've had so many things to do. That immediate feedback piece is so empowering and I think beneficial to the students. What other thoughts do we have here? Clear about next steps. Students feel safe because of the empowerment. Candace, yes.
Brandy, to kind of build on what some others have said about that immediate formative feedback, one thing I noticed about their feedback was that it was really validating the students' strategies instead of their innate smarts. So there was a lot of, I love how you use that strategy or how you applied this, something that we'd done on another day, instead of you're so smart or just a generic good job. The feedback was really specific to the task that the kids were working on. And so that is empowering because it makes you feel as a kid like, oh, I did something right. It gives them a little bit of momentum, I think.
I loved how the second teacher, when he shared something with the students, it was obviously a math class, but we got to hear some cross-curricular vocabulary, and that was huge for me when he said, align your answers vertically or your work vertically so it's clear to the reader. And that vocabulary that they hear, I think even that small piece of literacy into the math curriculum where people feel like that's a difficult task to accomplish, and something that a lot of teachers have been asking about when it comes to that cross-curricular piece. I love to see that. And honestly, as a coach and teacher, that empowered me to go help and share those thoughts and that simple idea with other educators.
And I'll add on to what Candace said. You know, feedback, if we're not careful, we tend to only use it when we want to fix something, you know, like maybe more in the negative sense of fixing a behavior we want to see change. But in that case, it's about reinforcing what I want to see. Like, oh, I saw how you use the strategy, keep that up. So I think that was really neat to see and hear that clear feedback on that end of the spectrum.
And I just want to say that I think that, I know she's checking for understanding, but it amazes me how quickly she's diagnosing all these, you know, little issues that are going on. I mean, I just think that is phenomenal. But what is the most beautiful thing to me is that as she's giving all this feedback, she's doing it in such a way that really builds relationships with these kids. You know, they feel that their success is important to her. It seems like, you know, she's very, I think she makes it really clear that she believes in them and that they're going to succeed. And just the relationship building that goes with that, I think, is so empowering for these kids.
And I echo what Candace said about, gosh, those interactions really make you miss the classroom with those students. And I think as teachers, sometimes we find it difficult, like how did we meet and engage every student personally during the day to make sure no one was missed or felt unnoticed. And I think this is an excellent tool and strategy to use for that. Thank you so much for sharing your comments. Now let's build upon our momentum. We're going to watch that last lesson segment just one more time to have it fresh in your memory. And we want you to think about how could we strengthen this lesson even more. And you'll see there on the participants guide, if you chose to use it, there's a place for your notes. But again, how could this lesson be more developmentally responsive, challenging, empowering, and or equitable to further leverage that relationship building that we see her do so seamlessly? Take it
Let me
away.
ask you real quickly. Do you feel like you need to see the video again, or do you think you could do it without it? What do you think? If you need to see the video, give us a thumbs up. Okay. All right.
You've got 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Christy, our amazing Vanna White, with our videos. All right, we have in the chat, someone has shared, just to share this thought with you before we start, but developmentally responsive thought was social. What about peer-to-peer feedback or interaction? We would love for you to think about that as you respond on the Jamboard. The link will be dropped in the chat. On the Jamboard, we want to see how you personally would, I guess, strengthen this lesson. This would be a great place for Bethany to add her developmentally responsive piece. Just note that on Jamboard, you are able to respond via writing in an image, and you can also use a sticky. So let me copy this link for you. And there you are. Please respond in the Jamboard, and we'll give you about, what do you say, Christy, 3 minutes?
That sounds great.
One minute, folks. All right, if you'll finish up your last thought, please. Let's surface some of these amazing responses. Okay, developmentally responsive, we have what about the peer-to-peer feedback or interaction? Maybe even have the students show their work in another format, maybe giving them choice in that, however they would like to respond. I think those are great. Anyone else want to add to that? Let's look at the challenging piece. Students could use an exemplar response to provide their own feedback to themselves or a peer. I love that. Examples and non-examples, I'm such a huge fan of. I think that does empower the students and offers a challenge in the sense they know what they can work towards. Students could work with peers to discuss their answers. Be sure to check. Don't forget in the feedback, more specific, maybe have someone show the class or someone else. I love that, to have students share out, which again goes to those examples and non-examples. Anyone have anything to add to challenging? All right, let's move on to empowering. On this one, let me make my screen a little bigger. Choice and problems to work, I think that would be great, especially I think that could go in with developmentally responsive as well. Students could share their strategy for how they solved it, and the teacher could highlight the different approaches. I think that would be huge to students to see that there is more than one way. Sometimes just a perspective shift there is huge for them. Could share out a learning strategy in class or on the board, maybe even remotely on Padlet or Jamboard in order to promote agency. Let's look at this equity piece. Maybe consider the environment. Some students would not like other students to hear their feedback, especially if it is refining. That's a good thought. How could we still give students that immediate quick feedback a little more personally, possibly? Is there a place students could go, flip chart, anchor chart, if they need extra help just for that next step and those scaffolds and support? Small groups for the students to interact with each other and also for the teacher to scaffold instruction if needed. Great. And this educator is so amazing. These may be things that she does, but I think it's great for us to have a moment to kind of dig into a scenario and see how could we personally leverage the community and relationship building piece. Even though this is an amazing example, we always can grow to be better. All right, folks.
Okay, for this slide, this is our final reflection. We'd like to ask you to think about what you plan to do, either as a coach or a teacher, to foster community within the classrooms that you work, in regard to being developmentally responsive, empowering, challenging, and equitable. What do you need to stop? What should you continue? And what do you need to start? You can answer either in the chat or by unmuting.
And we are not going to set a timer to honor your time. We're just going to surface those responses as they come in. I love that. I will stop using general praise and be more specific. That will definitely empower your students and also challenge them, especially for those refinements. Considering both positive and refining feedback. Hallelujah, Christy. Amen. Refuse to lower the bar. We spoke to that, and I think something about virtual learning lends itself well to that. We tend to do that. I will begin to ask teachers to consider what in-person techniques we use to establish rapport and relationships and how we can translate those techniques in a remote setting. I love how you made that applicable to you, Candace, who is a coach and not in the classroom at this time. Thank you for sharing your reflections. If you'll see here, we have access to our materials, and if you'll go back one slide, Christy.
It's not there anymore.
Oh, We have an infographic that will also be added to our materials, and you can access those materials. Christy will share with you how.
Okay, we also have an evaluation. Thank you so much for being with us. Please take our 1-minute survey. We really do use that feedback to improve. We are always looking for ways to improve.
And we also want to accommodate your need in the classroom right now as we continue to offer more professional learning. So be sure to answer that question as well and share with us ways that you're looking to improve your own instruction.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.